Welcome back. More than 1 billion people globally are using AI chatbots like OpenAI's ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, and Elon Musk's Grok. But just how accurate are those answers? Forum AI just released results from the latest independent AI study on news and current events to determine which models are most reliable. Forum AI ranks the major AI chatbots in different categories on a leaderboard called Newsbench. And joining us now to explain is Robbie Goldfarb. He's the co-founder of Forum AI. And Robbie, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. So what is Forum AI and Newsbench, and who does the vetting?
Sure. So Forum AI, we work with leading experts. So think top academics, top practitioners, journalists to evaluate AI in complex areas like news and politics. And our goal is to help the companies developing AI, as really any companies looking to use AI, to do so in a way that works well and that people can trust.
So can you tell us more about the findings? Which chatbot was the most accurate?
Sure. So for context, so Newsbench it's an evaluation or a test that we designed to assess how well the chatbots respond to questions about news. And so we built a test that looks at three things. We looked at accuracy, so are they getting the facts right? We looked at bias or neutrality, are they leaning in one direction or the other? And we looked at sourcing, so when the models have to use outside sources, are those sources reliable? What we found, I think, there were certainly some bright spots, but I would say the results even surprised us. There's a lot of work to be done here. And so on accuracy in particular, probably the most notable finding is across about 12,000 responses we looked at, about a third of them had a factual error. So that could be a wrong number, a wrong date, a misstated policy. It could be a misattributed quote. We saw that several times. Now, this wasn't even across the model. So GPT, as you can see here, was a little bit better. So only about 10% of its responses had errors, whereas Grok and Claude, that number was it was just over 40%.
I want to stay on that real quick because I was personally surprised that Claude is number 3 on that list there and that ChatGPT is number 1. Is that because ChatGPT has been on the market for longer and is most well known? Why do you think that is?
It's possible. I mean, it's hard to say. There are broadly a couple factors at play here. I think one is the actual training of the models. So how much time are these companies spending training the models on this use case, on news? So remember, these models are also being used for coding and for all sorts of other functionality. And so the amount of time spent training the model on news is one factor. The other piece are the sources that the models have access to, right? And so sometimes these models need to look to external sources to be able to respond to questions. And so that has an impact on the responses that the models give as well.
Okay. And what about when it comes to neutrality and political leanings? What did you guys find about that?
Yeah, so when we looked at neutrality, what we said is when there are topics where multiple perspectives exist, are the models fairly representing those, or are they taking a position themselves? And what we found is across the board, in about 15 to 30% of cases, these models did take a position themselves. However, once again, it wasn't even across the models. So 3 of the 4 models you can see here, Claude, Gemini, and GPT, would lean left when they took a position, whereas Grok would lean right. The other interesting thing I'll point out here is we found that the models tended to be more biased on open-ended questions. So if you're looking sort of almost openly for who should I vote for, or what should I think about this policy, that tended to be where we saw more bias from the chatbots.
That is so interesting. Okay, that brings us to our next question here, because were the sources they used reliable and trustworthy?
Yeah, so for context, as I mentioned earlier, these chatbots often will need to refer to external sources, especially when covering news, to get information that the models themselves might not know. And what we found was probably the most interesting finding is in 15%, or about 1 in 7 responses, the models relied on foreign state-sponsored media sources, particularly from China and Russia. And what's interesting is oftentimes these sources would be used to respond to questions that actually had nothing to do with their home country. So for example, we saw China's Global Times cited in a response about US domestic politics. We also saw Russia's RT cited in a question about US political division.
1 in 7 is no joke. So with all of that in consideration, does your team have recommendations for these companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple things here. I think first, the good news is these problems are solvable, right? We've identified them. They generally present in consistent ways so they can be targeted, but they are complex and they need to be prioritized. And so I think that the first message is, these need to be a priority and people care. I think the second piece is transparency, right? One of the great things about chatbots, but also one of the scary things, is you can ask them pretty much anything and they're going to respond to you and they're going to sound confident.
Yeah.
So part of the picture here is thinking about how we redesign some of the way these products interact with people to be a little bit more transparent when they're not sure about what the answer might be.
Yeah, and I also want to ask about you and I and people who are out watching this as well. What do they need to think about? What do they need to consider? When I use ChatGPT or even Claude, for example, I also Google it just to make sure there's more information out there that supports what I was just told. Is that something people should consider doing as well?
Absolutely. And I want to clarify, we are extremely excited about AI. These are incredible tools, and these chatbots are amazing, amazing products to help us understand the world. So the message certainly isn't to avoid them, but the message is that we have to know their limits.
Yeah.
And rather than avoid them, what we do need to know is we need to recognize that they're not a replacement for our own critical thinking.
That is so true. Robbie Goldfarb, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate this conversation because it's very important. Have a great day.